Good morning. I had a question come to the blog that I'm quite excited to spend some time with. This teacher points out an interesting nuance that I want to spend just a couple of minutes with. Here's how the email starts. Several of my colleagues and I have been wondering why Dr. Bates is now endorsing teaching to the test after we've always been told that teaching to the test is not ethical, which it's not, and it's not what the district supports, which we don't. And then it goes on, in the opening training meeting video, Dr. Bates presented a teacher at Magna who had amazing scores on her testing. Well, first of all, it wasn't her testing. It was kids that were demonstrating huge growth. And that's crucial. There's a glib way to respond to this issue, or a short way. Let me do it this way with an anecdote. Who, and this will sound familiar, I've asked this question before, who here ever had a teacher in college where you carefully took notes of everything they said all semester long? And when the final came, it had nothing to do with what had been taught all semester long. I can raise my hand. I can think of several people in that, several teachers that I had that kind of fit that mold. It's not ethical, and nobody's asking anybody to teach the test. But learners, students for our purposes, deserve to be taught what is going to be assessed. Now there's a nuance there, but I don't think it's that difficult to work your way through. Kids deserve to be taught what it is that they're going to be assessed on. Now that brings naturally another question. Why do we have to teach that stuff? Well, there's two things going on there. First of all, some of us remember the mid-'80s when the state first published a core curriculum. And I remember teaching in math, and you'll remember down in the Provo School District, those of you who remember that there are these fat binders, and that was the standards of the core curriculum, and we put them on our shelves, and we didn't, frankly, look at them very closely and just stayed with the textbook. Well, from that point forward, really, the State Board of Education began asserting a constitutional responsibility that they have. You see, superintendents don't have authority to establish standards and objectives for any curriculum. Principals don't have that authority. Teachers don't have that authority. The local school board doesn't have that authority. That responsibility vests with the State Board of Education to establish a scope and a sequence and standards and objectives for all of the courses that are taught in Utah's public schools. And in a very real and literal way, the state of Utah contracts with its school districts, and school districts then hire principals and teachers, contracts with school districts to teach those objectives and those standards to the children of the state of Utah. Now, you might say, who are they to make that decision? Well, that's who the Constitution says makes that decision. And interestingly, just a couple of years ago, given concerns about the core curriculum and something's rotten in the apple, you'll remember all of that stuff, the governor convened a task force of folks, not K-12 folks, but brought people together to study and look at the scope and sequence that the State Board of Education had adopted, the standards and objectives that the State Board of Education had adopted. And they came back and they said, hey, you know what? These align, this scope and sequence aligns very well to college entry and workforce entry expectations. And they certainly align much better than did the previous standards and objectives that the new ones had been adopted in 2010 to replace. So, let's say you're a first grade teacher out there someplace, and we got a lot of first grade teachers, and they're wonderful. And the first grade teacher might think, my job is to make kids love school. You know what? That's true. Or my job is to teach kids to be good citizens. That's true too. My job is to help overcome these crazy issues that a lot of our kids come to school with because of their backgrounds or things that are just completely beyond their control. That's true too. We call that socio-emotional learning. And that's an important component of what we do. But a first grade teacher's primary job is to lay the foundation for the second grade teacher to build upon, and the third grade teacher to build upon, and the fourth grade teacher, because if there are bricks missing, shall we say, in the foundation that was supposed to be taught in first or third or whatever grade, that house isn't going to stand as they move forward. So we've got the socio-emotional learning, which is crucial, but it's only crucial to the effect that it empowers kids to learn what we're contracted with to do, and that's the academic learning, to build a foundation so they can be successful throughout their lives academically as well as socio-emotionally. Another point here. In a nutshell, the teacher looks at the core and only teaches the main items on the test. Let me address that for a minute. Very few of us have the luxury to have students very few of us have the luxury to have the time to teach the entire breadth of the core, to teach all of it in a given year or in a given course. And so teachers are very closely looking at the core, which are the most foundational pieces that are most necessary for that progression moving forward. In fact, Granite teachers have taken our core. You can look at the curriculum maps, and there's in fact a picture of a key next to standards, which Granite teachers have identified and believe to be the most important ones as far as building this foundation is concerned. And so what this teacher was telling us, what she had done, is, you know what, I identified the ones that are the most critical and the most crucial. Those ones I focus on. I make sure the kids don't leave my class without having learned those. These other ones, they're good too, and I'll move those in as I'm able, but I'm going to focus on these key ones. It just so happens that state assessments recognize that same kind of principle, and they focus. There were going to be more questions on those particular standards because those are the more fundamental and questions, or standards rather, on which the whole building gets built. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to address this. I hope I've addressed that nuance. No, we don't teach the test, but kids deserve to be taught what they're going to be assessed on, and in terms of why, they're assessed on the standards and objectives that the State Board of Education has established in a coherent K-12 progression that builds a foundation that prepares kids for college and work entry expectations. Thanks so very much.